Can you imagine looking up into the sky at an object the size of 5 football fields in length? How about seeing a huge black triangle hovering over your neighbor's house in the dead of night? In the following stories, we're going to cover 3 compelling accounts of real UFO witness reports. Each case has been chosen not only for its mystery, but also for its obscurity. Make sure you stick around for the last story, where the situation somehow gets creepier after the sighting. These are some of the best encounters you've never heard of. When my dad was a teenager, in the 80s, he went out hunting with my grandpa in southern Idaho. They had made camp at the bottom of some foothills, and the plan was to hike up into them the next morning and start hunting. So early in the morning, probably around 3 a.m., Dad and Grandpa start making their way up the hill. One thing to note about this region, it's pretty much just empty grassland and brush. You don't get many trees until you start heading into the mountains. So Dad could easily see their campsite down below them, even in the moonlight. So regarding that, at about halfway up the hill, Dad turns around to take a look at the valley below him, and he's confused by what he sees. Hovering around their campsite about a mile away were a dozen or so red lights. He couldn't tell how big they were, but they moved around seemingly at random, not just on the valley floor. Some of them had to have been several meters in the air. This was long before drones became a thing, and the closest human being to them had to have been at least 20 miles away. Just before Dad could raise his voice, Grandpa told him to keep moving. So he did, but he kept looking back at the red lights still moving near their campsite. He tried to talk to Grandpa, but he just shut him up and tell him to keep walking. Eventually, they make it to the top of the hill, and Grandpa suddenly tells Dad to crawl underneath a bush. They both get under one, and Gramps pulls out his binoculars. Turns out he'd seen the lights all the way back while they were at camp. Apparently, they'd been approaching the camp from the other side of the valley, and Grandpa wanted to get some distance between them before he did anything. They laid there in the bush, quietly watching the lights. They couldn't tell what exactly was going on, but their activity was definitely centered around their camp. At about 5-ish, the sun started to peak above the hills. And right as it did, both Dad and Grandpa heard an extremely loud and high-pitched ringing coming from down in the valley. They assumed it was the lights that made the sound. After a few seconds of the ringing, the lights began to rise into the sky until they were out of sight and a ringing could no longer be heard. It was this event that made both of them question what they'd seen. They stayed in the bush for a good 2 or so hours. Once they decided the coast was clear, they proceeded down the hill back to camp. When they arrived, it was clear that something had searched the camp. Nothing had been taken, but items had been haphazardly thrown around, and anything that had been in a bag or container was now strewn all over the ground. They quickly left after packing everything up and never went back there again. Both of them still live in southern Idaho, and whenever extraterrestrial stuff is brought up, they will often recount this story. Back in 2006, Belgrade, Serbia. It happened at somewhere around midnight. There were 3 of us lying on kind of improvised deck chairs. We were on the flat rooftop of his home. We were just lying on our backs and talking, inadvertently looking at the sky. At some point, a black triangular shape started to appear to my left, over the neighboring house roof. I remember vividly how slow it was. It took a second or two until the entire craft was visible. It was approximately the size of an average house in length and 10 to 15 meters above our heads by my rough estimate. I had trouble estimating the actual height, but it took up a fairly large field of view. I did not say a word. I don't know why. I guess it was because I was so transfixed. I remember thinking I should be telling them, but I didn't. One of my friends then yelled, "Look at that! Look at that!" It was only then that I responded with, "Yes, I see it." My other friend was pretty confused, until he saw it as well. We all then jumped out of our seats, and by this point it was virtually above us. We stood and watched in absolute shock. It moved so slowly, no sound and no details on it. I remember trying my best to pick up any details on its surface, but nothing. Just a dark silhouette. Perhaps the only reason we saw it in the first place was because the night sky was dark blue and brighter than the object itself. Its surface was so dark, no reflection, no nothing. No lights on it, just a dark triangle. It went in a straight line, same slow speed, until we lost sight of it. I didn't notice any height in its shape once it started distancing itself. I don't know if it was completely flat. I'm just saying I couldn't notice it. Here's a 3D rendering I did recently. It is very close to how we saw it that night. The only difference is that the sky was darker. This is the first time I've ever tried telling this story to anyone outside the family. I'm leaving out the time and location and some other details because I'm still scared of what might happen with it publicly. Summer before 8th grade, me and 2 of my friends snuck out at midnight to go walk around the neighborhood and go and see these girls on the next block. We turned a corner in our neighborhood and there was this huge, black, blimp-shaped thing in the sky. Like the pictures of the Hindenburg, but bigger than that and as close if not closer. Completely silent and the size of at least 4 to 5 football fields across. We stared at it entranced, asking each other over and over again if we could see it. It was like black polished gunmetal. No lights, no sound, no anything. It was just hovering there. And then I don't know what happened, but time clearly jumped. Next thing I remember is the blimp had gone. All there was left was a tiny glowing white barbell thing in the sky, seemingly slowly falling to earth with wisps of smoke coming off it. Then, 2 brand new black trucks with silver gearboxes on the back came speeding down the street, going about 70 in a residential 25-mile-per-hour neighborhood. After that, I remember walking home to one of my friends' houses and going to bed. At that point, it was like 5 or 6 a.m. and the sun was coming up. We all made a promise to tell my dad in the morning because he worked for the city, but we never did. I don't know what happened later in life to one of my friends who was there, but the other was my best friend and we sort of made an unspoken pact never to talk about it. I don't know how or why we did that. As we grew up, I sort of lost touch with him too. We did reconnect over Facebook and such over the years, but it was like there was something between us neither of us wanted to talk about. Looking back on it now, there's no way we could have been the only ones to see it. It wasn't that late at night and it was over a heavily populated suburb of a major city. The idea of this has always scared me more than any sort of possible abduction scenario. That there were others, and we're all voluntarily suffering a sort of collective amnesia. I've thought about hypnosis, but that scares me too. Plus, I'm not sure if I'd trust the results. I was just a kid then, and I'm not sure if I could trust the hypnotist. What I do know, again, is that there's no way it was just the 3 of us who saw it. We're talking a huge thing hovering in the sky directly above hundreds of houses just after midnight on a weekend in summer. But nothing on the news, nothing in the paper, nothing on TV. This is a true story. This happened, and there's no way I'm the only one who remembers. No way at all. I hope you enjoyed the video. There are so many captivating and well-documented UFO cases that have just gone unnoticed by the community. In this new series, I will be sharing with you some of the most compelling sightings that have never had mainstream attention. I am steadily building a list for future videos. If you know of one that should be included or would like to share your own real encounter, please post it in the comments section below. The more detailed, the better. Thanks for watching.